The palace of Noctaris rose like a black crown against a blood-red sky, its spires piercing the eternal twilight that shrouded the vampire kingdom. Tonight, the halls glittered with 1,000 candles, black wax dripping like tears on the silver candelabers, as nobles from every corner of the realm gathered for the wedding of King Darian Nocturne to Lady Seraphine Ashwood, a vampiress of ancient bloodline and cold ambition. But there was another guest who commanded more whispers than the bride herself. Queen Alara Moonveil, no, former Queen Alara, stood in the shadows of the eastern corridor, her hands resting protectively over the swell of her belly beneath her dark crimson gown. 6 months pregnant, abandoned, stripped of her crown 3 moons ago when Darian declared their union incompatible with the future of the throne. The official reason given to the court was her inability to produce an heir quickly enough. The truth, she knew, was far simpler. He had grown bored of her light, her mercy, her refusal to rule through fear alone. "Your Majesty requests your presence in Grand Hall," a guard announced, his voice carefully neutral, though his eyes held pity. Even the soldiers knew what was about to happen. Alara lifted her chin. She had been a queen for 7 years before she had been a wife. She would not tremble now. The doors opened, and the sound hit her like a wave. Laughter, music, the clinking of crystal goblets filled with fresh blood wine. The Grand Hall was a masterpiece of Gothic architecture, vaulted ceilings painted with scenes of ancient vampire victories, chandeliers of bone and ruby. At the far end, the throne dais where Darian sat beside his new bride. He was as devastating as ever, dark hair that fell like midnight silk to his shoulders, eyes the color of storm clouds, a face carved by centuries into something both beautiful and terrible. He wore black velvet and silver, a crown of obsidian thorns upon his head. Beside him, Seraphine glowed in white, a mockery of purity, her blonde hair woven with diamonds, her smile sharp as a blade. The music stopped as Alara entered. Every eye turned to her. The whispers grew to a roar, then fell to silence. Darian stood, and the hall seemed to hold its breath. "Ah, Alara," he said, his voice smooth as poison honey. "How gracious of you to attend. We are honored by your presence on this joyous occasion." Joyous. The word was a dagger between her ribs. "I came because you commanded it, my lord," she replied, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. She would not call him your majesty. That much, at least, she could deny him. "Indeed I did." Darian descended the dais steps with predatory grace, circling her slowly while the court watched. "You see, my dear court, my beloved bride wished to hear music on our wedding night. And I remembered, how could I forget, that my former queen possessed the most exquisite voice in all the realm." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some looked away in shame. Others leaned forward with cruel anticipation. Seraphine's laughter was like breaking glass. "Oh, how delightful! I have heard tales of her talent. Surely she would not deny a bride her wedding gift." Alara's blood ran cold. He was going to make her sing. At his wedding, while pregnant with his child, while he married another. It was the ultimate humiliation, designed to break her before the entire kingdom, to show that even his former queen was nothing more than entertainment, a discarded toy to be played with one final time. "I ask this of you, Alara," Darian said, stopping before her, so close she could smell the familiar scent of night jasmine and old blood that clung to him. "Sing for us. Sing for my bride. Sing for your king." The throne room waited. Outside, thunder rumbled across the dark mountains. Inside, the candle flames danced as if held by invisible hands. Alara looked into Darian's eyes, those eyes that had once looked at her with something resembling love, or at least its shadow, and she saw nothing there now but cold satisfaction. He believed he had won. He believed this would destroy whatever remained of her dignity. "As you wish," she whispered. Triumph flickered across his face. He returned to his throne, pulling Seraphine close, ready to enjoy the spectacle. The court musicians prepared to accompany her, but Alara raised a hand. "No instruments," she said quietly. "My voice alone will suffice." Darian's smile widened. "Even better. Begin." Alara closed her eyes. She thought of the child growing inside her, their child, though he had refused to acknowledge it. She thought of the 7 years she had spent trying to soften his darkness, to bring mercy to a throne built on blood and fear. She thought of the night he had told her she was no longer wanted, no longer useful, no longer enough. And then she began to sing. The first note rose from somewhere deep within her chest, a sound so pure and haunting that every conversation died instantly. It was not a wedding song. It was not a song of celebration. It was a song of truth. Her voice filled the vast hall, climbing the stone walls and curling around the ancient rafters like smoke, like spirits, like memories given sound. She sang in the old language, the tongue of their ancestors, which every vampire understood in their bones, if not their minds. She sang of a girl who had come to this dark palace with hope in her heart, believing that love could transform even the coldest of kings. She sang of nights spent in his chambers, where he had whispered promises against his skin, where she had believed, foolishly, that she mattered to him beyond politics and power. The court began to shift uncomfortably. This was not what they had expected. Illyra's voice grew stronger, more powerful, carrying not anger but something far more dangerous, truth laced with sorrow. She sang of the child she carried, conceived in what she had thought was love but now understood was merely convenience. She sang of the moment her crown was stripped away, of the cold announcement that she was being replaced, of the nights she had wept alone in the east wing while preparations for this wedding began in the halls outside her door. Darian's smile had faded. His hand gripped the armrest of his throne, knuckles white. Seraphine's face had gone pale, her triumph curdling into something uncertain. She had wanted humiliation. Not this. Not a mirror held up to the man she had just married, showing her exactly what he was capable of doing to those he claimed to love. But Illyra was not finished. Her song shifted, and the temperature in the hall seemed to drop. Frost began to form on the windows, impossible, even in the vampire realm. The candles flickered wildly, shadows dancing across the walls like accusing fingers. She sang of the sacrifices she had made for this kingdom, the reforms she had tried to implement to bring fairness to the lower vampire houses, the way she had stood beside Darian through rebellions and trials. She sang of the council meetings where her voice had been silenced, her ideas dismissed, her presence tolerated only as an ornament to his rule. And then, the killing blow. She sang of still loving him despite it all, and how that love had become her greatest weakness and his greatest weapon against her. The hall was utterly silent except for her voice. Some of the nobles had tears streaming down their faces, an extraordinary sight, for vampires rarely wept. Others stared at the king with new eyes, seeing clearly for the first time the cruelty they had always chosen to overlook. Darian stood abruptly, his face a mask of rage and something else, something that looked almost like pain. "Enough," he commanded, but his voice cracked on the word, robbing it of power. Illyra's eyes opened, meeting his across the length of the hall. She sang the final verse, a prophecy in melody, that the child she carried would be greater than he could imagine, that love would always be stronger than pride, and that this moment, this wedding, would be remembered not as his triumph, but as the night he revealed his true heart to his kingdom. The last note hung in the air like a ghost, echoing and re-echoing, until it finally faded into profound silence. Then Illyra curtsied, a perfect, graceful curtsy that somehow held more dignity than any crown ever could, and turned to leave. "Guards, seize her." Darian's voice thundered through the hall, but it came too late. The damage was done. As hands grabbed her arms, Illyra smiled softly. She had come here expecting to be humiliated. Instead, she had humiliated him, not through anger or accusation, but through truth wrapped in beauty, through pain transformed into art. The wedding was ruined. The celebration had become a wake. And as they dragged her from the hall, Illyra heard what she had hoped to hear. The sound of doubt spreading to the vampire court like wildfire, as nobles who had supported Darian's decision began to question what kind of king would do this to a woman who carried his heir. The song had done what words never could. It had made them all feel. They locked her in the tower, not the dungeons. That would have been too obvious, too much of an admission that Darian feared what she represented. Instead, he imprisoned her in the Tower of Whispers, the highest point of the palace, where ancient queens had once gone for solitude and contemplation. It had a bed, a small washroom, even a window overlooking the dark forest that surrounded Noctaris. But the door was sealed with blood magic, and 2 guards stood watch at all times. Elara sat by the window, watching the eternal twilight shift through its subtle gradations of purple and red. 3 days had passed since the wedding. 3 days since her song had shattered the carefully constructed facade of King Darien Nocturne's perfect new beginning. She had heard fragments of news from the guards when they brought her meals, always looking uncomfortable, always leaving quickly as if her presence reminded them of their own complicity. The wedding feast had continued after her removal, but the atmosphere had been poisoned. Guests departed early. The wedding night had been observed more as duty than passion. And in the council chambers, questions were being raised, quietly at first, then with increasing boldness, about the king's treatment of his pregnant former queen. The old families are displeased. One guard had muttered to another outside her door last night, not realizing how well vampire hearing worked. House Silvermoon has withdrawn their support. Lady Ravencrest called it disgraceful. Good, Elara thought. Let them see. Let them question. Let the truth spread like dawn breaking through darkness. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the child move within her. Strong already. A fighter. Your father is a fool, she whispered to the child. But you won't be. You'll be better than both of us. Footsteps on the tower stairs broke her reverie. Heavy, purposeful footsteps that she would recognize anywhere. Her body tensed involuntarily. The blood magic seal hissed and evaporated as Darien's power commanded it. The door opened. He stood in the doorway, no longer in his wedding finery, but in simple black clothing that somehow made him look more dangerous, not less. His face was haggard, shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. He looked like a man who hadn't slept since the wedding. "Leave us," he commanded the guards. They obeyed instantly, footsteps retreating down the stairs. Silence stretched between them like a chasm. That was quite a performance, Darien finally said, his voice low and controlled, the tone he used when he was at most dangerous. You managed to turn my wedding into a referendum on my character. Impressive. You commanded me to sing, Elara replied calmly, not rising from her seat by the window. I merely obeyed my king's order. His jaw clenched. Don't play games, Elara. You knew exactly what you were doing. You turned the court against me. I did nothing of the sort. I sang the truth. If the truth has turned them against you, perhaps you should examine the truth itself rather than blame the messenger. He moved into the room with that supernatural speed vampires possessed, suddenly close enough that she could see the storm of emotions battling in his eyes. Fury, yes, but also confusion, and something that looked almost like hurt. I gave you everything, he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. A crown, power, the highest position any woman could hold in this realm, and you repaid me with humiliation. Elara laughed then, a sound without humor, brittle as ancient parchment. You gave me a crown and called it everything while taking away every shred of dignity I possessed. You paraded me as your queen, but silenced my voice in council. You shared my bed, but not your heart. And when I finally conceived the heir you claimed to want, you discarded me for a woman whose only qualification is that she agrees with your every word and would never dare question your cruelty. Cruelty? The word seemed to strike him. I am a king, Elara. I make difficult decisions for the good of the realm. No! She stood now, facing him fully, her pregnant belly between them like a shield and an accusation. You make decisions that serve your pride. There is a difference, Darien, and the fact that you cannot see it is precisely why this kingdom will eventually crumble under your rule. His hand shot out, gripping her arm, not painful but firm, demanding her attention. You don't know what it costs to rule. You never did. You came here with your ideas of mercy and fairness, thinking you could change centuries of tradition with pretty words and gentle reforms. But this is the vampire kingdom, Elara. We survive through strength, through fear, through destroying everything good that comes near you, she finished. Yes, I understand now. I understand perfectly. He released her as if burned, stepping back. For a moment, something cracked in his carefully maintained mask, genuine anguish flickering across his features before he locked it away again. I never meant to hurt you, he said, and for the first time, she heard something real in his voice. Something beyond the king, beyond the performance. Something almost human. "But you did," Ilara said simply. "You hurt me in ways that will never fully heal. And worse than that, you hurt our child, who will grow up knowing their father chose pride over love, power over family." "I didn't know you were pregnant when he began, then stopped. "When you what? Discarded me? Replaced me? Humiliated me?" Ilara shook her head. "And would it have mattered, Darian? Would you have kept me if you'd known? Or would you have simply waited until after the birth to cast me aside?" He had no answer. The silence itself was answer enough. Thunder rolled across the sky outside, and rain began to fall, rare in the vampire realm, where weather itself seemed to bend to the collective mood of the kingdom. The rain streaked down the tower window, like tears the stone could not shed. "The council is demanding I acknowledge the child," Darian said finally, turning away from her to stare out at the storm. "House Silver Moon, House Ravencrest, even some of the younger nobles who usually support me, they're saying I violated the ancient codes, that abandoning a pregnant queen is beneath the dignity of the throne. And what does your new bride think of that?" Ilara asked, unable to keep the bitter edge from her voice. His silence was telling. "She's afraid," Ilara said, understanding suddenly. "Afraid that you'll do to her what you did to me. Afraid that no matter how perfectly she performs the role of queen, she'll eventually disappoint you, or bore you, or fail to meet whatever impossible standard you set. And she's right to be afraid, Darian, because that's exactly what will happen." "You don't know her," he snapped. "I don't need to. I know you." Ilara moved closer, her voice dropping to something almost compassionate despite everything. "You're afraid of vulnerability, of needing someone, of loving someone enough that they could hurt you, so you hurt them first. You push them away before they can abandon you. It's why you destroyed what we had, because for a brief moment, you actually cared for me, and that terrified you more than any enemy ever could." "Stop," he said hoarsely. "You don't." "I do understand," she interrupted. "I understand you better than you understand yourself. And that's why my song destroyed you, Darian. Because it wasn't just truth about me. It was truth about you. And you can't stand to see yourself clearly." The rain intensified, hammering against the tower stones. Inside, the space between them felt charged with electricity, with unspoken words, with the ghosts of what they'd once been to each other. "What do you want from me?" Darian asked finally, and he sounded exhausted, ancient in a way that had nothing to do with his centuries of existence. "An apology? Acknowledgement of the child? Your crown returned? Tell me what will make this right." Ilara laughed again, but this time there was genuine sadness in it. "Nothing will make it right, Darian. What's broken between us can never be repaired. But what you can do, what you must do, is let me leave." His head snapped toward her. "Leave? The kingdom?" "Yes. Let me go somewhere far from here. Somewhere I can raise our child in peace, without the poison of court politics and your cruelty. Give me a small estate, enough resources to live comfortably, and let me disappear from your life as completely as you wish me to." The council would never accept. "The council will be relieved," Ilara said firmly. "They want this situation resolved. They want the embarrassment to end. If you present it as an act of mercy, allowing your former queen to retire to a quiet life with her child, they'll accept it, especially if you publicly acknowledge the child as your heir, even if you name them far down in the line of succession." Darian stared at her, as if seeing her for the first time. "You've thought this through?" "I've had nothing but time to think." She placed a hand on her belly again. "I won't let my child grow up in a place where they're seen as a mistake or a weapon. I won't watch you parade your new family while pretending we don't exist. Give me freedom, Darian. It's the least you owe me." He was silent for a long time, and she could see the calculations running behind his eyes, weighing political advantage against personal desire, pride against pragmatism. Finally he spoke. "I'll consider it. But if I agree, you will never speak of what happened between us. You will never use your gift of song to turn others against me. You will become a footnote in history, nothing more." "I was already nothing more," Ilara said quietly. "The difference is that now I choose it. Darian moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at her one final time. For a heartbeat, his mask slipped completely, and she saw naked regret in his eyes. Too late and too small to matter, but real nonetheless. "I did care for you," he whispered. "In my way." "I know," Alara replied. "That's the tragedy. Your way was never enough." He left without another word, the door sealing behind him with a hiss of magic. Alara returned to the window, watching the rain continue to fall. Her child moved within her, strong and determined. "We'll be free," she promised. "One way or another, we'll be free." The announcement came exactly 1 week after Darian's visit to the tower. The royal herald stood before the assembled court, his voice echoing to the grand hall. The same hall where Alara's song had shattered the illusion of a perfect royal wedding. The nobles gathered in their finery, whispers already circulating about what this emergency council session might entail. King Darian sat upon his throne with Queen Seraphine beside him. His new wife looked uncomfortable, her hands clutched in her lap. Her usual confident smile replaced with an expression of barely concealed anxiety. The past week had not been kind to the royal couple. The court remained divided, with several powerful houses withdrawing to their estates in silent protest, and rumors spreading to the kingdom like wildfire. "By royal decree," the herald announced, "His Majesty King Darian Nocturne has decided to grant his former queen, Lady Alara Moonveil, leave to retire from court life to the eastern estate of Silverpine. There, she shall live in comfort and dignity, raising the child she carries, who is hereby acknowledged as a legitimate heir of House Nocturne, fourth in line to the throne." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Fourth in line, that was significant. It meant Darian was publicly claiming the child, not bastardizing them. It meant any children he had with Seraphine would take precedence. But Alara's child would still have royal status, rights, and protections. Furthermore, the herald continued, Lady Alara will be granted an income suitable to her former rank, a household staff, and full protection under royal law. In exchange, she will withdraw from all court affairs and political matters, living a private life away from the capital. The pronouncement hung in the air like the toll of a great bell. Lord Silvermoon, the eldest and most respected of the noble houses, rose from his seat. "A wise decision, Your Majesty. Merciful and just." His tone made it clear that he found this surprising, perhaps even questioning whether it was truly mercy or simply political expediency. Lady Ravencrest, a sharp-eyed vampiress who had been one of Alara's few allies in court, also stood. "The kingdom is well served by this resolution. Perhaps now we can move forward from recent unpleasantness." Darian's jaw tightened at the carefully chosen word. Unpleasantness. As if his wedding hadn't become the most talked-about scandal in generations. "The decree is sealed," Darian declared, his voice brooking no argument. "Lady Alara will depart tomorrow at sunset. This matter is concluded." But his eyes, Alara noticed from her position at the back of the hall, where she'd been required to stand for the announcement, told a different story. They were haunted, restless, carrying the weight of a decision that satisfied no one, least of all himself. The tower room seemed different knowing these were her last hours within it. Alara packed a few possessions she was permitted to take. Some books, clothing, a small music box that had belonged to her mother. She ran her fingers over the velvet-lined case, remembering her life before all this. A minor noble house, simple pleasures, dreams of adventure that had led her straight into this gilded nightmare. "You'll have a better life," she told her child. "I promise you that." The door opened without warning. Not Darian this time, Seraphine. The new queen stood in the doorway, her white gown pristine, her blonde hair perfectly arranged, every inch the picture of royal dignity. But her eyes were red-rimmed, and her hands trembled slightly at her sides. "Lady Alara," she said formally, then hesitated. May we speak?" Alara gestured to the chair by the window. "I have little choice in visitors, it seems. Please." Seraphine entered, closing the door behind her. For a moment, she simply stood there, looking lost and young despite being several centuries old. "I came to apologize," Seraphine said finally. Of all the things Alara had expected, that wasn't one of them. Apologize for the wedding, for laughing when he asked you to sing. I thought, Seraphine's voice cracked, I thought it would be amusing. A final show of his power over you. I didn't understand what I was witnessing until you began. What did you witness? Ilara asked, genuinely curious. Truth, Seraphine whispered. Love. Sacrifice. Everything I thought I could avoid by being different from you. Harder, colder, more suited to his darkness. But your song showed me that none of that matters. He will destroy me too, won't he? Eventually, Ilara felt an unexpected pang of sympathy for this woman who had taken her place. I cannot predict the future. Perhaps you'll fare better than I did. Perhaps you'll learn to armor your heart more effectively. Or perhaps, Seraphine said, meeting her eyes, I'll learn that some prices are too high to pay, even for a crown. That would be wisdom, Ilara acknowledged, but wisdom often comes too late in this place. Seraphine stood to leave, then paused at the door. Your child, the one you carry. They're fortunate to have you as a mother. You love despite knowing it would hurt you. That's braver than anything I've ever done. After she left, Ilara sat in silence, processing the unexpected encounter. Perhaps there was more to the new queen than she thought. Or perhaps Seraphine was simply beginning to realize the cage she'd locked herself into. Either way, it was no longer Ilara's concern. Sunset painted the sky in shades of crimson and gold as the carriage was prepared in the courtyard. It was an elegant vehicle, black lacquered wood with silver fittings, drawn by 4 midnight horses that stamped impatiently against the cobblestones. A small crowd had gathered to witness Ilara's departure, mostly lower nobles and servants, those who had admired her attempt at reform, who had seen in her a different vision of what the vampire kingdom could be. She descended the palace steps slowly, her hand on the railing, her pregnant belly making her movements careful. She wore a traveling cloak of deep blue, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. Without the crown, without the royal garments, she looked younger, more like the girl who had arrived at this palace years ago full of hope. The crowd parted, and suddenly Darian was there. He stood at the bottom of the steps, alone, having apparently dismissed his guards. Seraphine was nowhere to be seen. It was just the two of them, one final time, with the dying light painting them both in shades of fire. So, you're really leaving, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. And you'll never come back. Never. Something shifted in his expression. Grief, perhaps, or regret, or simply the acknowledgement of a loss he'd brought upon himself. I want you to know something, Darian said quietly, stepping closer. What I said in the tower, that I care for you my way, that was true. But I've come to realize my way was broken. My way has always been broken. Ilara studied his face, seeing the cracks in his armor widening. Then fix it, Darian. Not for me. I'm beyond your reach now. But for Seraphine, for whatever children you may have with her, for the kingdom, learn to love without destroying what you love. I don't know if I can. Then you're doomed, she said simply. And so is everyone foolish enough to care for you. He flinched as if she'd struck him. Good. Let it hurt. Let truth be the blade that finally penetrates his defenses. The child, he said, changing the subject. You'll write? Send news of their growth. If you wish it. I do. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small velvet pouch. For them, when they're old enough to understand. Ilara took it, feeling the weight of something heavy inside. She didn't open it. Not here, not now. I'll make sure they know it came from you. Tell them. Darian paused, struggling with words that clearly didn't come naturally to him. Tell them their father was a fool who learned wisdom too late. Tell them to be better than me. I will. The crowd watched silently as the former king and queen faced each other one last time. Then Darian did something unexpected. He knelt, not a full bow, but a lowering of his head, a gesture of respect that sent shocked murmurs through the assembled witnesses. Travel safely, Ilara Moonveil, and know that despite everything, despite all I've done, you are the best thing that ever happened to this kingdom. We just weren't worthy of you. Ilara felt tears prick her eyes, the first she'd allowed herself to shed in his presence. Goodbye, Darian. She climbed into the carriage without looking back. The driver snapped the reins, and the horses moved forward, their hooves clattering against the courtyard stones. As the palace receded behind her, growing smaller and smaller until it was just a dark silhouette against the twilight sky, Elara finally opened the velvet pouch Darian had given her. Inside was a ring, his mother's ring. She realized with shock, an heirloom of House Nocturne, worth a fortune, but valued far more for its symbolic significance. And wrapped around it, a note in precise handwriting. For our child, so they remember they come from greatness, even if their father fell short of it. May they have your heart, and not mine. Elara closed her fist around the ring, feeling its cool metal press into her palm. Perhaps he wasn't completely beyond redemption. Perhaps, somewhere beneath the layers of cruelty and pride, the man she'd glimpsed in rare moments of vulnerability still existed. But it didn't matter now. Her path led away from him, toward a new life, a new beginning. She would raise her child in light and love, far from the darkness that had consumed their father. The carriage rolled on through the night, carrying her toward freedom and whatever future awaited her beyond the borders of Darian's kingdom. Behind her, in the palace, the king sat alone in his throne room long after everyone had left, staring at nothing, tasting ashes where there should have been triumph. The eastern estate of Silverpine had transformed under Elara's care. What had once been a modest manor house was now a thriving small community, not just for her and her child, but for those who had followed her into exile. Lower nobles who disagreed with Darian's increasingly harsh rule, servants who had loved her during her time as queen, even common vampires seeking a different way of life. Here, in this remote corner of the realm, Elara had built something precious, a place where mercy was not weakness, where voices could be heard regardless of rank, where the old rigid hierarchies of vampire society were gently challenged and reshaped. And at the heart of it all was Mira. Mira Nocturne stood at the edge of the training ground, her silver sword catching the eternal twilight as she moved through a complex series of forms. She was beautiful in a way that transcended simple physical appearance. Dark hair like her father, but her mother's gentle eyes. Tall and graceful, moving with that supernatural speed that marked her vampire heritage, but with something else too, a warmth, a light that seemed to emanate from within. 18 years old today, the age when vampire children came fully into their power. "Your form is improving," came a voice from behind her. Elara approached, older now, streaks of silver in her dark hair, though her face remained uniged by vampire standards. She carried herself with quiet dignity, no crown, but somehow more regal than she'd been in all her years on the throne. "Mother," Mira said, sheathing her sword, "I didn't hear you approach." "That's because you were too focused on your training. A good quality, but remember, the best warriors are always aware of their surroundings." Elara smiled. "Come, there's something I need to give you." They walked back to the manor together, through gardens that Elara had cultivated herself, past the small council hall where the state residents gathered to discuss community matters. It was a modest life compared to the palace, but it was real, built on genuine relationships rather than power and fear. In Elara's private study, she retrieved a wooden box from a locked drawer. Inside lay the ring Darian had given her 18 years ago, along with the note, and something else, a leather-bound journal. "Your father asked me to give this to you when you came of age," Elara said, placing the ring in Myra's palm. "It belonged to his mother, your grandmother. It marks you as a true heir of House Nocturne, regardless of your position in the line of succession." Mira turned the ring over in her hands, studying the intricate silver work, the ruby at its center that seemed to glow with inner fire. "And the journal? That's mine. The story of what happened. All of it. The truth about your father, about me, about why we live here instead of in the capital. You're old enough now to understand." Mira settled into a chair, and over the next hours, Elara told her everything. The marriage, the attempts at reform, the growing coldness, the abandonment, the wedding, and most importantly, the song. "So you humiliated him," Mira said when the tale was complete, "in front of the entire court." "I told the truth in front of the entire court," Elara corrected. "There's a difference. Humiliation implies intent to harm. Truth simply reveals what already exists. And he let you go because the court forced him to." "Partly. but also because Ilera paused, choosing her words carefully. Because I think a small part of him recognized that what we had was poison for both of us, that the only kindness he had left to give was absence. Mira was silent for a long time, processing everything. Finally, she spoke. I've heard stories about him, from travelers, from merchants who come from the capital. They say the kingdom is darker now, harsher. That Queen Seraphine died 5 years ago. Some say from broken heart, though officially it was a hunting accident. Ilera's expression tightened. I heard that as well. She was not a bad woman, just one who made the wrong choices trying to survive in an impossible situation. And he never remarried, never acknowledged any other children, just rules alone from that throne, becoming more isolated, more cruel. Mira looked down at the ring in her hand. Fourth in line. Do you know what happened to the others? The children he had with Seraphine, 2 daughters, were never strong. One died in infancy. The other, I heard she took vows and entered the sanctuary of eternal night, essentially removing herself from succession, which would make you. Second in line. Mira finished, after whatever heir his brother's line produced. His brother died childless 3 years ago, which makes you. First in line. Myra's voice was flat, emotionless. The heir apparent to a king who abandoned me before I was born. A position you never asked for and don't have to accept, Ilera said firmly. You can live your life here in peace. The court has forgotten about you. Darien hasn't contacted us in years. You can choose your own path. But Mira stood, walking to the window, her expression troubled. What if I don't want to be forgotten? What if I want to understand him? Not to forgive him, but to understand what shaped him into someone who could do what he did to you. Ilera's heart clenched. Mira, I've been having dreams, Mira interrupted, turning to face her mother. For months now, dreams of the palace, of the throne room, of a song that shatters glass and breaks hearts. Dreams of him, sitting alone in the dark, surrounded by all his power and completely empty inside. Those are just dreams, darling, perhaps influenced by the stories you've heard. No, Myra's voice was certain. They're more than that. I think he's calling to me. Not consciously, but somehow. I think part of him knows I exist, knows I'm his only remaining heir, and despite everything, part of him wants to know me. And if you go to him, if you reveal yourself. Ilera's voice rose with concern. He could reject you again. He could use you as a political tool. He could also be lonely, Mira said softly. He could be filled with regret. He could be exactly what you sometimes were during my childhood, Mother, when you'd sit by the window on stormy nights and weep and pretend you weren't crying over someone who didn't deserve your tears. The words struck true. Ilera turned away, unable to meet her daughter's knowing gaze. I'm not going to the capital to reclaim anything, Mira continued. I don't want his throne or his approval, but I need to see him. I need to understand my own history. And maybe, she hesitated, maybe I need to see if the song you sang that night changed anything, or if it was just a beautiful moment that faded into nothing. 2 weeks later, Mira Nocta arrived at the vampire capital unannounced. She wore simple traveling clothes, her mother's old cloak, and carried nothing that would identify her as nobility. She'd come alone, against Ilera's pleading, determined to see the kingdom and her father with her own eyes before revealing who she was. What she found shocked her. The capital that her mother had described, glittering and cruel, powerful and proud, had become something else. The streets were still beautiful, the architecture still magnificent, but there was a hollowness to it. The vampire citizens moved through their routines with mechanical precision. No joy in their eternal existence, no light in their ancient eyes. And everywhere, in taverns and markets and noble houses, people spoke of the king. He's mad with grief, one merchant told her, not knowing who she was. Hasn't left the palace in years. Just sits in the throne room, making decrees that grow stranger by the day. I heard he talks to ghosts, a serving girl whispered. The ghost of his first queen, the one who sang. They say he plays music in the throne room late at night, trying to remember her song. "The kingdom is dying," an old noble said bitterly. "Without an heir, without hope, without a ruler who cares for anything beyond his own guilt. We're rotting from within while he drowns in regret." Mira listened to it all, pieces of a puzzle assembling in her mind. Her father wasn't the cruel tyrant her mother had fled. That man had been consumed by something else. Not love, perhaps, but corrosive poison of remorse delayed too long to do any good. She made her decision standing in the shadow of the palace gates, looking up at the black towers that pierced the red sky. She would go to him, not as a supplicant, not as a victim, but as a mirror, showing the result of his choices, the daughter he'd abandoned who'd become exactly what he'd needed all along. The guards tried to stop her at the palace entrance. She expected that. What she didn't expect was her own voice, speaking with her mother's measured authority, saying, "Tell King Darien that his heir has arrived. Tell him Mira Nocturne has come home." The throne room was exactly as her dreams had shown her, vast and cold, beautiful and empty. The black candles had burned down to stubs. The ruby chandeliers hung dark and lifeless. And at the far end, on the obsidian throne, sat a man who looked like a shadow of the king her mother had described. Darien Nocturne had aged in ways vampires weren't supposed to age. His dark hair was shot through with gray. His face, once devastatingly handsome, was gaunt and lined with exhaustion. His storm-gray eyes were hollow, haunted by ghosts only he could see. He stared at her as she approached, walking down the long aisle between empty seats where nobles once gathered. His expression shifted from confusion to shock to something that might have been hope, so fleeting she almost missed it. "You look like her," he said when she stood before the throne. His voice was rough, as if rarely used. "But you have my eyes." "I have her heart," Mira replied. "That's more important." "Mira." He spoke her name like a prayer, like a curse, like a word he'd forbidden himself from saying aloud for 18 years. "You're real. You came. Did you expect me to?" "I hoped. I've hoped for years, though I had no right to." He descended from the throne slowly, an old man's careful movements despite his vampire strength. Up close, she could see the full extent of what guilt had done to him. "Why are you here?" "To understand," Mira said simply. "Mother told me everything. What you did, how you hurt her, why we live in exile. But she also told me about the man you were in brief moments, the glimpses of something better buried beneath the cruelty. I came to see which one is real." Darien laughed, a broken, bitter sound. "They're both real. That's the horror of it. I am both the monster who destroyed the best thing in my life, and the fool who has spent 18 years drowning in regret. I am king of nothing, Mira, a man with infinite power and no idea how to use it for anything but harm." "Then step down," she said bluntly. "If you truly believe that, abdicate. Let someone else rule." "Who?" He gestured to the empty throne room. "My court has crumbled. The great houses barely speak to me. I have no heir, no family, no one who would take this burden willingly. You have me." The words hung in the air like a bell toll. Darien stared at her as if she'd struck him. "You can't be serious. You're 18 years old. You've lived your entire life away from court. You don't know." "I know mercy," Mira interrupted. "I know justice. I know how to listen to people rather than rule through fear. I learned all of that from Mother, from the community she built. And I have something you never did. I know what it's like to be genuinely loved, to grow up knowing I was wanted and valued. That's worth more than any amount of political training. The court would never accept. The court is desperate. They're dying under your rule of guilt and isolation. They would accept a trained dog at this point if it offered them hope." Mira stepped closer, her voice softening. "I'm not here to forgive you, Father. I'm not even here to know you, really. But I am here to offer you a chance at redemption, not for yourself, but for this kingdom. Step down. Name me heir. Help me learn what I need to know. Then disappear to whatever peaceful ending you can find. Give the kingdom the thing you never could, a future." Darien's legs seemed to give out. He sank back onto the throne, but now it looked less like a seat of power and more like a cage he'd trapped himself in. "Why would you do this?" he whispered. "After everything I did to your mother, to you, why would you want to save anything I've touched?" "Because Mira said gently, "Someone has to break the cycle. Someone has to prove that the children of cruel men can choose to be better." And because I heard Mother's song, she recorded in her journal, the one she gave me. I read the words, felt the truth of them, and I understood that her power wasn't destroying you, but in transforming pain into beauty, hatred into truth. That's the kind of queen this kingdom needs. Not one who rules through fear, but one who rules through the transformative power of witnessed truth. Tears ran down Darian's face, the first tears he'd shed in centuries. "I don't deserve this mercy." "No," Mira agreed, "you don't, but your people do, and so does Mother, who deserves to know that her sacrifice, her pain, her song, that it all meant something in the end, that it changed the story." She extended her hand, an offer, a bridge across 18 years of absence and hurt. After a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Darian took it, 6 months later. The coronation of Queen Mira Nocturne was nothing like her father's wedding had been. There was no cruel performance, no humiliation, no pretense. Instead, the throne room, cleaned and lit properly for the first time in years, was filled with hope. The great houses had returned. Common vampires were permitted to witness the ceremony, and in a place of honor, seated beside the young noble who had agreed to serve as Myra's chancellor, was Alara Moonveil. She wore deep blue, the color of twilight skies, her silver-streaked hair braided with pearls. She looked proud and sad in equal measure, watching her daughter accept a crown she'd once worn and finding the weight of it no burden at all. When Mira was asked to speak, she stood before the assembled kingdom and did something unexpected. She sang, not her mother's song, that belonged to Alara alone, a moment of pain transformed into power. Instead, Mira sang something new, a song of hope, of second chances, of kingdoms rebuilt on foundations of truth rather than fear. Her voice filled the throne room just as her mother's had 18 years before, but where Alara's song had shattered, Myra's healed. Where Alara's had revealed, Myra's inspired. And in the back of the hall, no longer king, merely Darian Nocturne, her father wept openly, not from sorrow this time, but from something he thought lost him forever, hope. After the ceremony, Alara found him in the palace gardens, staring at the night-blooming flowers she'd once planted during her time as queen. They'd survived, somehow, through years of neglect. "She's extraordinary," Darian said without turning. "Everything I wasn't." "She's everything we both could have been," Alara corrected gently, "if we'd made different choices." "Thank you," he said, "for raising her, for loving her enough that she could come here and save us all from my mistakes. I didn't do it for you." Alara's voice was firm but not unkind. "I did it because she deserved better than the darkness we created." "I know." He finally turned to face her, and she saw that some light had returned to his eyes. Not much, but a spark, at least. A possibility. "What will you do now? Return to Silver Pine?" "Eventually. But Mira asked me to stay for a while, to help her navigate the court, to be her advisor. Someone has to teach her which nobles are trustworthy and which will smile while plotting. You'll do well at that." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "You always saw people more clearly than I did." They stood in silence for a moment. Two people who had loved and destroyed each other, now connected by the daughter who had transcended both their failures. "Did it hurt?" Darian asked suddenly. "That night when you sang, did it hurt as much as it looked like it did?" "More," Alara said honestly, "but it was necessary. Pain transformed into truth is the only kind of pain that matters." "I wish—" he began, then stopped. "I know," Alara said, "but wishes change nothing. Only actions do, only choices." She left him there in the garden, among the flowers that refused to die despite years of neglect. A small symbol of hope, of resilience, of a possibility that even in the darkest kingdom, light could persist. And in the throne room, Queen Mira Nocturne began her reign, carrying her mother's strength and her father's power, but guided by her own wisdom. Wisdom born from witnessing pain transformed into art, cruelty into truth, and a song that shattered a kingdom so that it could be rebuilt into something better. The vampire kingdom would never be the same. But perhaps, for the first time in centuries. It could actually be good,